A billionaire's son slapped a pregnant waitress in front of everyone. He thought his money would make it all disappear. He had no idea that the woman he struck was married to a decorated Marine, or that the detective who showed up was family. What happened next brought a powerful empire to its knees. This is a true story about the moment one woman's dignity became more powerful than millions of dollars. Stay with me, because the ending will restore your faith in justice. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Sometimes I think about how the biggest moments in our lives start out like any other ordinary day. Let me tell you about Emma Rodriguez. She was 32 years old, 6 months pregnant, and working the morning shift at Rose's Cafe in a small town in Texas. If you've ever worked in a diner, you know that feeling. Your feet hurt, your back aches, and the smell of coffee and pancakes becomes part of who you are. Emma had been working at Rose's for almost 3 years. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest work. Her grandmother used to tell her that there's dignity in any job done well, and Emma believed that with her whole heart. Every morning, she'd tie her apron, check her reflection in the old bathroom mirror, and remind herself that she was doing this for her family. Her husband, James, was serving overseas in the military. He'd been gone for 9 months, and Emma missed him every single day. She kept his letters in her apron pocket, close to her heart. In his last letter, he'd written about how excited he was to meet their baby. He'd drawn little hearts in the margins and promised her that when he came home, everything would be perfect. Emma would read those letters during her breaks, touching her growing belly and whispering to her baby about the wonderful father who was waiting to meet them. The cafe was a warm place, full of good people. There was old George, a retired construction worker who came in every morning for black coffee and toast. There was Mrs. Patterson, the librarian who always left a generous tip and asked about Emma's pregnancy. These people had become like family to her. They celebrated when she announced she was expecting, and they worried about her when she looked tired. On this particular morning, the sun was shining through the windows, making patterns on the checkered floor. Emma was humming softly to herself as she wiped down the tables. She had no idea that in less than an hour, her life was about to change forever. She didn't know that a stranger would walk through that door and test everything she believed about justice and human kindness. The morning had been peaceful. Emma had served breakfast to her regulars, refilled coffee cups, and laughed at George's terrible jokes. Her feet hurt a little more than usual, and the baby was active today, kicking and moving inside her. She took a moment to rest her hand on her belly, feeling grateful despite the tiredness. Life wasn't easy, but it was good. She had her health, a baby on the way, and a husband who loved her. What more could anyone ask for? But then the door opened, and everything changed. His name was Trevor Blackwood, and you could tell just by looking at him that he came from money. Everything about him screamed wealth. His perfect hair, his expensive suit, his watch that probably cost more than Emma would make in a year. He was 28 years old and had never been told no in his entire life. When you grow up with unlimited money, sometimes you forget that other people are human beings too. Trevor walked into Rose's Cafe like he was doing everyone a favor just by being there. He was on his phone, talking loudly about some business deal, not even bothering to look where he was going. He slid into one of Emma's booths and kept talking, his voice carrying across the entire cafe. Emma approached his table with her notepad and a warm smile. "Good morning, sir. What can I get for you today?" Trevor didn't even look up. He just held up one finger, telling her to wait while he continued his phone conversation. Emma stood there, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, trying to ease the pressure on her back. She was used to rude customers. In this line of work, you develop thick skin. But there was something about Trevor's dismissiveness that felt particularly cold. When he finally ended his call, he still didn't apologize for making her wait. "Coffee. Black. And hurry up, I don't have all day." Emma nodded politely and headed to the coffee station. She poured a fresh cup, making sure it was hot and perfect. She'd served thousands of cups of coffee in her time at Rose's, and she took pride in doing even the small things well. As she walked back toward Trevor's table, carefully balancing the cup, she didn't notice the worn patch of floor tile that the owner kept promising to fix. Her shoe caught on that uneven tile. Time seemed to slow down. Emma felt herself stumbling, felt the hot coffee slipping from her hands. The cup tumbled through the air, and the dark liquid splashed across Trevor's expensive white shirt and designer pants. The cafe went silent except for the sizzle of bacon on the grill in the kitchen. For just a moment, Emma stood frozen in horror. Then her training kicked in. "I'm so sorry, sir. Please, let me help clean that up. I can pay for your dry cleaning." But Trevor was already on his feet, and his face was twisted with rage. "Are you kidding me? Do you have any idea how much this shirt costs? More than you make in a month, you clumsy idiot." His voice was so loud that everyone in the cafe turned to look. Emma felt her face burning with embarrassment, but she kept her voice calm and professional. "Sir, I truly apologize. It was an accident. Please let me." She never got to finish her sentence. What happened next would haunt that cafe and that town for a long time to come. Trevor's hand came up fast, and before anyone could react, he slapped Emma across the face. The sound echoed through Rose's cafe like a thunderclap. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The world itself seemed to stop spinning. Emma stumbled backward, her hand instinctively going to protect her pregnant belly as she caught herself against the table behind her. Her cheek burned where he'd struck her, and tears filled her eyes. Not from the physical pain, but from the shock and humiliation of being hit in front of people who'd become like family to her. Trevor stood there, chest heaving, his coffee-stained shirt forgotten in his anger. "Maybe that'll teach you to be more careful," he sneered. "People like you need to learn your place." The silence that followed was dangerous. It was the kind of silence that comes right before a storm breaks. Old George slowly rose from his corner booth. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of construction work, were shaking. Not from fear, but from barely controlled fury. He pulled out his cell phone with careful, deliberate movements. "Son," George said, his voice low and steady, "you just made the biggest mistake of your entire life." Mrs. Patterson had rushed to Emma's side, gently guiding her into a chair. "Honey, are you okay? Is the baby okay? Should I call a doctor?" Her voice was steady, but her eyes were flashing with protective anger. Emma touched her burning cheek, still too shocked to fully process what had just happened. She'd been insulted before, had dealt with rude customers, but never had anyone raised a hand to her. Her mind was spinning, trying to understand how a simple accident had turned into this nightmare. Trevor pulled out his wallet and threw a $100 bill on the table with theatrical arrogance. "That should more than cover your hurt feelings and whatever sob story you're planning to tell." He looked around at the shocked faces staring at him. "What? You all act like I committed some crime. She ruined a $2,000 shirt. I'm the victim here." The cafe door chimed as Trevor headed toward the exit, completely unaware that George's phone call was already connecting to someone who would change everything. He climbed into his luxury car, still muttering about incompetent waitresses and backward small towns, and drove away like nothing significant had happened. Inside the cafe, Emma sat with the ice pack Mrs. Patterson had brought her, pressing it against her swollen cheek. Her other hand rested protectively on her belly, feeling for the reassuring movements of her baby. The little one was still kicking, still okay, and Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Emma, honey, the police are coming," George said gently, kneeling down beside her chair despite his old knees protesting. "What that boy did, it ain't right. It ain't legal. And he's not getting away with it." Detective Lisa Warren arrived at Rose's cafe 15 minutes after George's call. She'd been a police officer for 20 years, working her way up from beat cop to detective, and she'd seen just about everything. But there was something in George's voice on the phone, a mixture of outrage and barely contained excitement, that told her this wasn't just another routine call. As she interviewed Emma, who still held the ice pack to her face, George hovered nearby with an expression that reminded Lisa of someone who knew a secret that was about to explode. "Ma'am, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell me exactly what happened," Lisa said gently, her notepad ready. Emma recounted the incident with quiet dignity. Her voice didn't waver, even when she described the moment Trevor's hand struck her face. She didn't exaggerate or add drama. She just told the truth plainly and simply. "Detective, there's something else you need to know," George interrupted, his eyes twinkling with something that looked almost like satisfaction. "About Emma's husband." Lisa looked up from her notes. "What about him?" Emma's face showed confusion. "George, James is deployed overseas. I don't understand what that has to do with." "Honey," George said gently, "what's your husband's full name and rank?" "James Warren. Master Sergeant James Warren. Marines." Emma's voice carried pride despite her confusion. The color drained from Detective Warren's face. She set down her pen with the careful precision of someone who's just received news that changes everything. "Emma," Lisa said quietly, "James Warren is my son." The cafe fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Emma's eyes widened as the implications began to sink in. Detective Warren's expression had shifted from professional sympathy to something much more personal, and much more dangerous for Trevor Blackwood. But wait, George continued, unable to contain himself any longer. There's more. Detective, you might want to run that boy's license plate through your system. I got a good look at it when he peeled out of here. Fancy car like that, stands out. 20 minutes later, Detective Warren returned from her patrol car with information that would soon ripple through the Blackwood family like an earthquake. Trevor's vehicle had been flagged in connection with 4 hit-and-run accidents over the past 3 years. Accidents that his wealthy father's legal team had somehow made disappear through sealed settlements and legal maneuvering. Each time, Trevor had driven away from damaged property and injured people, and each time, money had made the consequences vanish like morning fog. But this time would be different. Emma, Detective Warren said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of both personal connection and professional duty. I think it's time the Blackwood family learned that some things can't be bought or buried. Would you be willing to press charges? Emma looked down at her belly, thinking about her baby, about James serving overseas, about all the other waitresses and workers who'd probably been treated like dirt by people like Trevor Blackwood. Yes, she said firmly. Yes, I would. The Blackwood family emergency meeting took place in a conference room that was bigger than Emma's entire apartment. When Police Chief Robert Hayes and Detective Warren walked in carrying a file folder thick enough to use as a doorstop, Nathan Blackwood felt his carefully controlled world begin to crumble. His son Trevor sat slouched in a leather chair, still wearing the coffee-stained shirt like some kind of badge of honor. Nathan had raised his son to be confident, to be powerful, to understand that the Blackwood name meant something in this state. But looking at Trevor now, he wondered if he'd created a monster instead. Gentlemen, we have a serious problem, Chief Hayes began, his voice carrying 30 years of law enforcement authority. Your son assaulted a pregnant woman this morning. But that's just the beginning. He opened the file and began spreading photographs across the polished conference table. Crime scene photos from 4 separate hit-and-run accidents. Each one meticulously documented, cross-referenced with Trevor's vehicle registration, GPS data, and cell phone records. The family's expensive lawyers had buried these incidents under mountains of legal paperwork and sealed settlements, but police persistence had slowly connected all the dots. Nathan's face went pale as he looked at the photos. He'd known about the accidents, of course. He'd written the checks, made the phone calls, pressured the right people to make the problems go away. But seeing them all laid out together like this, seeing the pattern of his son's behavior documented in black and white, made it impossible to pretend anymore. The pregnant woman your son struck today, Detective Warren continued, and her voice carried an edge that made Nathan nervous, is my daughter-in-law. Master Sergeant James Warren has served 4 tours of duty protecting the freedoms that allow your family to conduct business in this country. While he's been overseas risking his life, your son has been driving drunk through our streets, hitting people and property, and running away. Trevor's arrogance finally cracked. Dad, you said you handled all this. You said it was taken care of. You said. Be quiet, Trevor, Nathan snapped. He turned to Chief Hayes, his mind already working through options, calculating angles. Chief Hayes, surely we can reach some kind of understanding here. My son made a mistake, several mistakes, but he's young. He can learn from this. Perhaps a generous donation to the police department's fund, or... Mr. Blackwood, Chief Hayes interrupted, his voice cold. I'm going to stop you right there. The understanding we're going to reach is this. Your son will be charged with assault and battery on a pregnant woman. The district attorney's office is reopening investigations into all 4 hit-and-run cases. And if I find out you've been using your money and influence to obstruct justice, you'll be facing charges too. The room fell deadly silent except for the ticking of an antique clock that had witnessed 3 generations of Blackwood business deals. For the first time in his life, Nathan Blackwood understood that some problems couldn't be solved with money and lawyers. Detective Warren placed a photo on the table. It was Emma, taken just hours after the assault, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly, her cheeks still red and swollen. This young woman works 2 jobs to support herself while her husband serves our country. She's never asked for special treatment from anyone. She pays her bills, treats people with kindness, and lives with dignity despite having very little money. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Trevor. And today, your son taught her that being decent and hardworking means nothing to people like you. That her life doesn't matter because she serves coffee for a living. Trevor looked away, unable to meet her gaze. That lesson, Chief Hayes added quietly, is about to be corrected. The legal proceedings that followed would later be described by local newspapers as a watershed moment for the community. The district attorney, a tough woman named Patricia Cole who'd grown up poor and worked her way through law school, took personal interest in the case. She'd seen too many wealthy defendants walk free, while poor people served hard time for lesser crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage from Rose's cafe showed the assault clearly. Witnesses lined up to give statements. The reopened hit-and-run investigations revealed a pattern of reckless behavior that Trevor's father's money had temporarily hidden but couldn't erase. Nathan Blackwood hired the best defense attorneys money could buy, but even they advised him that fighting this case would be a losing battle. The public attention was too intense. The evidence was too clear. And most importantly, the victim was the wife of a decorated Marine serving overseas. No jury would side with a spoiled rich kid over a military family. Take the plea deal, his lead attorney advised. Community service, probation, restitution. We can keep him out of prison if he shows remorse and accepts responsibility. But Trevor didn't feel remorseful. He felt angry and victimized. In his mind, Emma had ruined his shirt, and everything that followed was somehow unfair to him. It would take months for him to begin understanding the magnitude of what he'd done. Meanwhile, Emma's story had spread beyond the small Texas town. News outlets picked it up. Pregnant waitress assaulted by billionaire's son, made for compelling headlines. Social media exploded with support for Emma and outrage at Trevor. Donations poured in from strangers across the country who wanted to help the pregnant waitress, standing up to wealth and privilege. Emma didn't ask for any of it. She just wanted justice and for her baby to grow up in a world where people were held accountable for their actions, regardless of how much money they had. Detective Warren kept Emma informed throughout the process, visiting her regularly not just as a police officer, but as family. James is being granted emergency leave, Lisa told her one afternoon. He'll be home next week. Emma's eyes filled with tears, happy ones this time. After 9 long months, she'd finally get to hold her husband again. He'd be there when their baby was born. And somehow, despite everything Trevor Blackwood had done, their life was going to be okay. Better than okay, actually. It was going to be beautiful. 3 months later, Emma stood in the courthouse hallway, her hand resting on her now very prominent belly. The baby was due in just a few weeks, and Emma felt like she was carrying a watermelon under her shirt. But she'd insisted on being here today, on seeing this through to the end. James stood beside her, his arm protectively around her shoulders. He'd been home for 2 months now, and Emma still sometimes woke up in the night just to make sure he was really there, really safe, really home. The military had granted him extended leave, so he could be present for the birth of their first child. He was thinner than when he'd left, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of things he'd seen and done that he rarely talked about. But when he looked at Emma, those eyes softened with a love so pure it made her heart ache. "You don't have to be here," he told her gently, not for the first time. "You could be home resting." "I need to be here," Emma replied firmly. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about every person who's ever been treated like they don't matter because they don't have money." Inside the courtroom, Trevor Blackwood stood before the judge, looking smaller somehow than he had that morning at the cafe. He'd lost weight. His expensive clothes hung differently on him. The arrogance that had defined him had been stripped away by 3 months of legal proceedings and public scrutiny. His father sat in the front row, looking older and more tired than Emma had expected. The federal investigation into the Blackwood family's business practices had revealed layers of corruption and influence peddling that went far beyond covering up Trevor's accidents. Nathan Blackwood was facing his own legal troubles now, and the family empire was crumbling. Judge Martha Williams, a 60-year-old woman known for her fairness and her intolerance for entitled behavior, looked down at Trevor from her bench. She'd reviewed every page of evidence, watched the security footage a dozen times, and read the victim impact statement Emma had written. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, her voice echoing in the quiet courtroom, "you have pleaded guilty to assault and battery, leaving the scene of multiple accidents and obstruction of justice. Before I pass sentence, I want to make sure you understand something." Trevor nodded, his lawyer having coached him to appear humble and remorseful. "When you struck Emma Rodriguez that morning, You didn't just hit a waitress. You struck a human being. A pregnant woman. The wife of a Marine who was serving his country while you were driving drunk through town and running away from the consequences of your actions. The judge paused, letting her words sink in. Your father's money bought you a lot of second chances, Mr. Blackwood. It bought you lawyers and sealed settlements. It bought you the illusion that you were above the law. But it couldn't buy you character. It couldn't buy you basic human decency. Those things come from inside a person, and no amount of money can purchase them. Emma watched from the gallery as Trevor's face reddened. She felt the baby kick inside her, and she placed her hand over the movement, drawing comfort from it. I'm sentencing you to 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of supervised probation, Judge Williams continued. Upon release, you will complete 1,000 hours of community service at a veteran support center. You will attend anger management counseling and substance abuse treatment. And you will pay full restitution to Mrs. Rodriguez and to the victims of your previous hit-and-run accidents. Trevor's face went white. His lawyer started to object, but the judge held up her hand. Furthermore, she added, I'm ordering you to write a personal letter of apology to each of your victims. Not a letter your lawyers draft, a letter from you, in your own words, explaining what you've learned from this experience. These letters will be reviewed by your probation officer, and if they're found to be insincere, your probation will be extended. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the entire courthouse. As they led Trevor away, he glanced back at the courtroom. For just a moment, his eyes met Emma's. She didn't look away. She didn't gloat or smile. She just looked at him with something that might have been pity, because she understood something Trevor was only beginning to learn. True strength isn't about power over others. It's about dignity in the face of hardship. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with cameras and microphones, but Emma's lawyer had prepared a statement on her behalf. She didn't want to be on television or become a public figure. She just wanted to go home with her husband and prepare for their baby's arrival. Detective Warren, Lisa, as Emma now called her, met them by their car. James embraced his mother tightly, and Lisa's eyes filled with tears seeing her son safe and home. I'm proud of you, Emma, Lisa said softly. What you did took courage. Standing up to people like the Blackwoods, going through this whole legal process while pregnant, you're stronger than you know. Emma shook her head. I just did what anyone should do. I told the truth. That's exactly my point, Lisa replied. In a world where it's easier to stay quiet, where it's tempting to just take the settlement money and move on, you stood up. You made sure Trevor had to face real consequences. And because of that, he won't hurt anyone else. The next waitress, the next person he thinks is beneath him, they're safer because of what you did. James squeezed Emma's hand. My wife, the hero, he said with a gentle smile. I'm not a hero, Emma protested. I'm just a waitress who got slapped and decided not to let it go. Sometimes, Lisa said wisely, that's exactly what heroes are, ordinary people who refuse to accept that cruelty and injustice are just the way things are. For weeks after the sentencing, Emma gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Rose, after the cafe where everything had changed. Little Rose had her father's dark eyes and her mother's determined chin, and from the moment she entered the world, she was surrounded by love. The settlement money from the Blackwood family, Trevor had been required to pay damages as part of his sentence, sat in a bank account, untouched for weeks while Emma and James decided what to do with it. It was more money than Emma had ever seen in her life, enough to change everything for their little family. One evening, sitting in their small apartment with Rose sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, Emma and James finally had the conversation they'd been putting off. We could buy a house, James said, bouncing ideas around. A real house with a yard where Rose could play. Maybe save for her college education. Emma nodded, but something was bothering her. James, do you remember in your letters, you used to write about why you joined the military? He smiled, remembering. I wrote a lot of things in those letters. You wrote that you wanted to serve because you believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. You wrote about duty and honor and making the world better for the next generation. James looked at his wife, understanding dawning in his eyes. What are you thinking, Em? I'm thinking about all the other military families out there struggling to make ends meet while their loved ones are deployed. I'm thinking about how alone I felt some nights, how scared I was, and how much harder it would have been without people like Mrs. Patterson and George looking out for me. She took a deep breath. I want to use half the money to start a foundation. Something to help military families, especially pregnant women and new mothers whose partners are deployed. Emergency funds, community support, practical help. James looked at his wife with such love and admiration that Emma felt her eyes well up with tears. "You're amazing, you know that? I just know what it's like to feel alone and scared," Emma said softly. "If we can help even one other family not feel that way, then something good came from what Trevor did." And so the Rodriguez Family Foundation was born. It started small, helping with rent here, buying groceries there, providing emergency childcare for a deployment spouse who had to work. But word spread quickly in the military community, and donations began coming in from unexpected places. Old George, who'd been the first to call the police that morning at Rose's cafe, became the foundation's biggest volunteer. He organized fundraisers and spread the word throughout the community. Mrs. Patterson helped with administrative work. Even some of Emma's other regular customers from the cafe pitched in however they could. Rose's cafe itself became something of a landmark. The owner finally fixed that worn patch of floor, and he installed a small plaque that read, "In this place, dignity stood its ground." Tourists sometimes stopped by, having heard the story, but to the regulars, it was still just their neighborhood cafe. The place where good people gathered and everyone was treated with respect. Trevor Blackwood served his jail time quietly. Without his father's money to shield him, Nathan Blackwood's business empire had collapsed under federal investigation, and most of the family's assets had been seized or tied up in legal proceedings. Trevor experienced life as an ordinary person for the first time. He worked in the jail kitchen, mopped floors, and slowly began to understand what real work felt like. His mandatory letters of apology were returned 3 times by his probation officer before they were finally accepted. The first versions had been full of excuses and self-pity. But eventually, after months of counseling and genuine reflection, Trevor wrote letters that actually expressed understanding of the harm he'd caused. Emma received her letter on a Tuesday afternoon. She read it while nursing Rose, James reading over her shoulder. "Dear Mrs. Rodriguez," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. What I did to you was cruel and cowardly. I spent my whole life believing that money made me better than other people, and I treated you like you were less than human because you served coffee for a living. I was wrong. You showed more strength and grace in one moment than I've shown in my entire life. I can't undo what I did, but I promise I'm trying to become a better person. Thank you for standing up to me. It was the first time anyone ever held me accountable, and it might be the thing that saves my life. Sincerely, Trevor Blackwood." Emma folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer. She didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. She just felt sad for all the years Trevor had wasted being cruel and entitled, and hopeful that maybe, just maybe, he'd meant what he wrote. 2 years later, Emma stood in Rose's cafe again, but this time as a customer. She'd gone back to work part-time at the cafe after Rose was born, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. She loved the regulars, loved the simple rhythm of serving food and coffee and conversation. Little Rose, now a toddler with wild curls and an infectious giggle, sat in a high chair eating pancakes and chattering away. James, who'd taken a job training new recruits at a nearby base, sat beside them, his hand covering Emma's on the table. George shuffled over with the coffee pot, his movements slower now but his smile just as warm. "Refill?" he asked, already pouring. "Thanks, George," Emma said, squeezing his weathered hand. She looked around the cafe at the familiar faces, at the sunlight streaming through the windows, at her husband and daughter. That terrible morning felt like a lifetime ago, but it had taught her something important. The world could be cruel and unfair, but it could also be just. Ordinary people could stand up to power. Truth could triumph over money. And from the ashes of cruelty, something beautiful could grow. Rose banged her sippy cup on the table and laughed, and Emma laughed with her, her heart full of gratitude for this simple, perfect moment. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us teach the world the most important lessons. And sometimes justice isn't about revenge. It's about making sure that dignity and kindness win in the end. That's the story, friends. Remember it the next time someone treats you like you don't matter because of your job or your bank account. You matter. Your dignity matters. And sometimes standing up for yourself changes more than just your own life. It changes the world. Thank you for listening.